Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're into an EU summit that's crucial because it's the one where they decide who gets what the presidency of commissions, not just the head of the European Commission, but also all the different commissioners. So there's a lot of wheeling and dealing going on right now in Belgium. With us to talk about it, he is a British Conservative member of the European Parliament. Sajjad Karim is in London. Also with us, French Socialist Member of Parliament Matthias Fekl. Edouard Tétrault, Director of the Paris branch of the European Council on Foreign Relations. And Antonio Di Bella, Paris correspondent for Italian state broadcaster La Rai. Before we resume with our panel, let's go to Ypres in Belgium, where our Europe editor, Christophe Robit, is covering the opening of that summit. First of all, Christophe, is it a given 100% certainty that Jean-Claude Juncker is the next European Commission president?
Well, I think it's very likely, Francois. I can't tell you for sure because officially this is not what the leaders are supposed to discuss tonight. Herman Van Rompuy, the president of the European Council, made it clear, said this would be the wrong place and the wrong day to discuss this very complicated dispute. He wants to keep it for tomorrow, for the second leg of the summit in Brussels. Today is really about reflecting on what happened 100 years ago when this very city found itself at the epicenter of the First World War, a war which claimed the lives of 16 million people. That's, to give you an idea, the population of present-day Netherlands. But of course, behind all these speeches, commemorations, there is this ongoing dispute. The British Prime Minister has vowed to block the nomination of Jean-Claude Juncker up until the end, but he is indeed very isolated, not least because yesterday he lost two crucial allies, Sweden and the Netherlands, who initially supported his initiative, but in the end decided to endorse the nomination of Jean-Claude Juncker. So if it comes to the worst, tomorrow the British Prime Minister will call for a vote in the European Council, asking each of his colleagues why it is they support Jean-Claude Juncker. And I believe it will hear a lot of them telling him, look, this is the best candidate we have at the moment. And also, now we have the Lisbon Treaty, and it's a new rule in the game. The party which came first in the election, the European People's Party, put forward a candidate, Jean-Claude Juncker, a former Prime Minister of Luxembourg, and he's the candidate we must support. This is part of a broader game of appointments. As you said, Herman Van Rompuy will have to be replaced in the coming months, and this might be a consolation for the British Prime Minister. Maybe he will push for what I would call a UK-compatible candidate. We're hearing that the Danish Prime Minister is now one of the favorites. She's a social democrat, but she's said to be very close to the British Prime Minister. She's very young. Maybe that will be a way for him to say, look, I lost the Juncker battle, but at least I've managed to push for a Danish leader who I regard as a reformist at the helm of the Council. But it's going to be very difficult, as always, a very difficult equation. We're expecting hours of talks, and we're seeing a very isolated but very determined David Cameron. And to be honest, this will not be very easy for him because he really vowed to block the nomination of Juncker. But as I told you, he's very isolated.
All right, he's very isolated. And just very briefly, Christopher, you've covered a lot of these summits. Is it a more open process than before, or is this summit just the same as every other?
Well, it is more open in the sense that with the Lisbon Treaty, it's now the political group that are putting forward candidates. So on paper, this makes it more transparent, more democratic. But to be honest, this new rule has created a lot of problems here, because I don't think that the leaders who are gathering tonight here in Ypres are very happy that the candidates are now being chosen by the parliament. There's a lot of resistance, including from Angela Merkel. But because you know, there was this story during the campaign that the voters would be electing candidates, the so-called Spitzenkandidaten, the front-runners who we saw debate in these televised debates. Well, that's a new rule of the game that they have to accept, but David Cameron doesn't want to accept it, clearly.
All right, thanks for that. Christophe Robit, who will be covering that summit throughout until its conclusion on Friday. And there you heard it. Is David Cameron simply saying out loud what a lot of other European leaders think, which is they don't want to see the power that was given to the elected leaders from the 28 states given over to the Parliament and to European institutions?
Let me give you a behind-the-doors part of a debate that we had our annual council of the ECFR, European Council on Foreign Relations, in Rome 2 weeks ago. One of our key workshops and discussions, so the council is 200 heads of state, prime ministers, ministers, secretary of state, etc. We were discussing, okay, Jean-Claude Juncker or not? I cannot give the names, but it has been a strong debate, a very difficult one. Is he the right person? Is it a power grab or not? But at the end of the day, the majority went to Jean-Claude Juncker. The reason was why was, to quote Prime Minister of a country, at least he believes in something. At least he believes in a more united Europe. At least he believes that Europe cannot stand tomorrow's challenges, Mr. Putin's Russia, the challenge coming from the south, if Europe is disunited. And so, yes, there could have been a better candidate. Yes, there might have been a better trading horses, etc. But at least he has this drive, this belief, this ambition for Europe. This is what we need. This is also what is lacking from our British friends. What is the alternative proposition of David Cameron? There is none, not even in terms of candidates, not even in terms of roadmap. Now, our British friends are the best at defining a strategic roadmap, at being pragmatic on how we push Europe's agenda further. It's not about, again, another discussion on Europe's institutions. It's on how we make them work for our common challenges.
Sajad Karim, is that the ultimate problem, that Jean-Claude Juncker is a federalist and is for a more united Europe?
The issue is this: does Mr. Juncker represent the views, the feelings and the wishes of the European people? And if you go away and you actually look at these latest election results, that is resoundingly not the case. And the fact of the matter is this: whatever our individual
Sorry, not the case. A majority of Europhiles were voted into the European Parliament. They'll have a strong majority when you look at the centre-right and centre-left.
The majority of Europeans didn't take part in this election. That is a fact. The majority of Europeans decided to send us a very clear message with their deafening silence. Thereafter, a sizable minority actually felt they had no choice but to move to the extremes to force us to listen to them. Now, the fact of the matter is this: that whatever our individual views may be about what the future of Europe should be, you cannot build any sort of Europe unless you take your people with you. And at this moment in time, the European institutions, the Commission and the Parliament are just far too distant from people. And unless we make them much more reachable for people, make them more accountable to people, make people feel they genuinely have a stake in these institutions, until that happens, I'm afraid you cannot move on the sort of path that Mr. Juncker is wanting to go on. It may be his ambition, it may be his vision. What he needs to do is to make it into the ambition of the European people. You cannot move in this direction unless we have our population with us. Otherwise, there will be a much greater reaction and there will be a much greater pull to the extremes, and we must all come together in order to avoid that from happening.
More federalism will just mean more extremes and doesn't respect the will of the people, Matthias Feckel?
I agree on one point with our British colleague. It is that there is a deep democratic crisis in Europe and a deep lack of faith in the European institutions. And that's why what is happening now is so important at this summit. And you have the past and the future. The past is to say that heads of state can choose behind closed doors and do whatever they want, and there has been a choice by European people, and then they can change this choice. And the future is that there is now a president of the Commission who has a democratic legitimacy. Of course, I would prefer to have Schulz as president. I mean, I'm a socialist member of the French Parliament, and I campaigned for him. I tried to convince people to vote for him, but he did not win, so he will not be the president of the Commission. But for the first time in years, there is a chance to have a president with a democratic legitimacy, and this is very important to have leadership in Europe again, because what is lacking today is a strong commission. We don't have too much Europe, we have too less Europe, and Europe has been weak. People who have been appointed have been weak leaders at the European level, and we need leaders
undermined by presidents and prime ministers?
Of course, because the heads of state, behind closed doors, as we said, choose people who would not be difficult for them, or who would not have the personality, the leadership to go against their choices. And what we need is a European interest, a European democracy to go forward, to push new projects. Edouard named some. There is energy policy, there is to fight. I did not interrupt you, so I will just finish my sentence. We need to fight unemployment of the youth, and in France we know what that means. We have to have a civil service for young people so that Europe becomes something concrete, pragmatic, and that's what's happening today. Of course, once again, I would prefer that it would be Mr. Schulz being appointed head of the Commission, but there are elections, and since democracy exists, and I think it was in Britain that the Parliament was the first Parliament in history to be so strong, there is a very simple principle. There are elections, then you have representatives, and they choose someone to govern them. And that's what has happened in these last elections, and it is a very important moment in European history.
Sajad Karim.
I must ask our socialist friend and Martin Schulz's colleague that is it right that the man who did not win the elections, i.e. Martin Schulz, can today make it conditional that the winner of the election be appointed, will only be appointed as the leader of the president of the Commission if the loser of the elections is appointed president of the European Parliament? Is it right that he is able to make it now conditional, having lost those elections?
We could ask another question. Is it right that one head of state can go against the will of European people who expressed their vote? Of course, there was not enough participation in the vote, but is it right that one head of state, head of government, the British Prime Minister, comes to the meeting and says, I do not want him to be appointed, whereas the whole democratic campaign of the election was about that subject? And the answer is no.
Well, you haven't answered my question, and the fact of the matter is this, that one head of state cannot block the appointment. If necessary, there will be a vote, and eventually it could well be the case that Mr. Juncker comes forward as the candidate. Mr. Cameron is not in a position to block. What he is in a position to do is to be absolutely open and honest about what he believes in the interests of the future of the European Union, and that is what he is doing. So please don't misrepresent to the viewers what the actual situation is.
All right, let's talk a little bit about policy here, and there's one that's concentrating the minds in France after the latest numbers on unemployment, and that is just how much belt-tightening you have to do. Now, over the weekend, center-left leaders huddled in Paris. There was at one point Matteo Renzi and François Hollande together. They threw their support behind a Jean-Claude Juncker presidency, even though he's not from their political family, all the while leveraging that endorsement against commissioner posts and lobbying hard for Eurozone nations to loosen the leash on the so-called Stability Pact, that rule that public deficits can be no greater than 3% of GDP.
If we respect our commitments, and if the Stability and Growth Pact is maintained, there is no reason why we should not use all the flexibility allowed within the treaties.
Flexibility, well, that's code for ease up a little bit on being too hard on budget deficits. It's a message that, by the way, that's not getting any traction so far from the man who's been anointed to take over the European Commission.
The Stability Pact will not be changed. It will be interpreted as stipulated in the text, which is made possible by a 2005 amendment to the pact.
Can we liken it to football? It's a game of two halves, and at the end, Germany wins?
Yes, sometimes, but Germany wins today because, not in football, in Europe, because it has a strong economy and it has ability to export, to innovate, to have growth and very important businesses. So that's.
But what do you think of that message saying, you know, we've done a little too much austerity here, and please, you know, it's not the time to be going within that 3% of the budget deficits going within 3% of GDP?
There is a need to have deep reforms. There's also a need to have growth policy, and you cannot have one without the other. And I think that's the message that has been said. But maybe Edouard.
Well, I think we are discussing all this transmission about names, but I think we should focus on principle and on programs. And that's what the leaders are doing this very moment in Yvres. The condition of the vote for Juncker made in the summit in Paris between Renzi and Hollande and all the social democrats is, okay, we will vote for Juncker, but we want some clear change in the program. And in this very moment, they are discussing which are the points, and are growth and flexibility. And that is a crucial point that will be followed by Juncker.
Yes. But I think we have what President Hollande called the possibility of a New Deal. And I think, again, I'm very optimistic. We are at a historic moment.
So you're for loosening the purse strings a little bit?
No. It's two things. Suddenly, Europe can have the possibility to have a powerful, because democratically elected leader with the legitimacy of the parliament. Then, second point, and I'm afraid it will not concern our British friends, but we have a very significant bank, which is called the European Central Bank, the ECB, that has managed to lend 1,000 billion euros 3 years ago to 500 banks to refinance their profiles. We have the possibility to do the same without a single parliament blocking it, without any country blocking it, to finance a long-term investment plan. This is the proposition that President Hollande will make at the summit tomorrow, of a New Deal, funding what was called the Agenda 2020 of Lisbon, which would put at work not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of workers through a large infrastructure plan, financing the Agenda 2020 of Lisbon. This is a possibility we have. But there is one counterpart, which is indeed everyone should put their house in order. It is not a possibility to continue to run runaway deficits as it happened in Greece or in Italy, but it's a deal. It's a each country puts its house in order, but then we share together a large investment plan that will fuel growth, that will create jobs. You know that in the Eurozone, leaving aside Austria and Germany, 35% of young people are unemployed below the age of 25. Now we have the possibility to put at work this amount of money to finance these plans. Energy infrastructure, digital, obviously defense, investments in defense. What is happening in Russia has not come unnoticed. And this is really, we can be optimistic if we are able to strike a deal. And I think,
have a Europe-wide stimulus program,
while keeping each house in order financially. And that is what Mr. Juncker is able to do. He has shown it in the past.
All right.
Cutting deals.
All right, cutting deals. Those deals, again, will have to be cut several ways, and we've been talking about it throughout this discussion, the way the vote went here in France last month. 1 in 4 voters went the way of the far right. Marine Le Pen, suddenly the star attraction in Brussels, you might say. She staged a big press conference in May with Dutch anti-Islam candidate Geert Wilders and the leader of Italy's regionalist Northern League. This week, however, we found out that she failed to muster the needed coalition to form a voting bloc. She failed, but Nigel Farage succeeded. Did that surprise you, Sajad Karim?
Well, of course, I am extremely pleased that Marine Le Pen finds herself in the position that she is in today. I would much rather that UKIP were not able to form the sort of grouping that they have been able to form. But at the same time, what we have to do is ensure that we reach beyond those particular MEPs and that grouping and address the concerns of the people that came and voted for them. As I have already said in this programme, I am not willing to accept for a second that all of the people or the majority of the people that came and voted for these parties were indeed populist or anti-Semitic or racist. These were people who thought they had no other avenue to register a protest but to do such an extremist thing. The point is that we now have to reach beyond those MEPs, beyond this particular grouping, and go directly to those people, our citizens, right across Europe, and address the concerns that they have raised with us.
All right. Antonio Di Bella, what do you make of the way the chips have fallen when it comes to the anti-establishment parties in Italy? The Northern League, well, they're out in the cold because they were going to be in with the far right. And then there's Beppe Grillo's Five-Star Movement.
Well, it's a populism in different shades of grey, we would say. The one is rising and then the other one is sinking. I mean, Lega is losing his grip and also is trying to grip the Marine Le Pen to survive. And Grillo is rising, is something different, it's more complicated, it's populism with different elements inside, right and
How
left.
much does he and Nigel Farage's UKIP have in common? They're going to be in the same voting bloc.
There are nothing in common, I think, and there is a big deal of criticism inside Grillo movement. A part of the members are against this alliance because they find it doesn't work, there are different principles. But indeed, they did for a practical reason, for a pragmatical reason, I would say. But I don't think this heterogeneous alliance can go anywhere beside the protest against Europe and against establishment. But I agree with our British friend that the best response to this populism party is a new approach of Europe and a new effective political New Deal. And in this way, it's the only way we can give an answer to this populism.
Sajad Karim, let me ask you, inside of your coalition is the Flemish nationalists, Bart de Wever's party, and some inside of his party are grumbling because they are Europhiles.
Well, it's quite interesting. If you go and dissect all of the groupings in the European Parliament, you will find a huge amount of diversity that is there. Now, to try and say that there is no room within a group like ours, the ECR, for people who are genuine reformists and want the best for Europe, I'm afraid is to once again present a picture that is far from the truth. We are the people who today are arguing that we have got to fight in order to preserve our European Union. If we simply ignore what our people are telling us, simply carry on in the way that we have done now year after year, this is ultimately going to get us into a situation where Europe becomes increasingly irrelevant for our citizens and increasingly diminished on the international stage. We do not want that to happen. And that is why today we are saying to you, let's come together and let's embark on a genuine reform program to start to deliver in the way that European citizens want. If we do not heed this call, we will all come to regret it. Now, you may think that these words are coming from a party that you can say is Eurosceptic, or sometimes we paint it as anti-European. We are anything but that. We are the ones who are saying that things cannot go on as they are. We have got to reform for the sake of Europe and for the people of Europe.
Edouard Tétrault, do you agree that you can have a voting bloc that has both the Tories in Britain and Bart de Wever's party?
I will not jump into a British muddling on politics, but I will just say one thing. We definitely need the British on board, but we need them. I am very saddened to see that our British friends are fighting yesterday's battle for Europe and trying to block things. This is a moment when Europe must move forward. It is moving forward. It will probably move forward very fast. We need the UK to put its fast-forward gear towards Europe. I think Britain should look it very clearly for its own interest. In 2 or 3 months, there is the possibility to have a disunited kingdom with Scotland going out. In a couple of maybe months or years, we have the possibility of the UK turning its back on Europe. What would happen to the city of London which is today's center for financial markets in Europe, if it is going out of Europe. I am saddened, I am worried to see Britain going backwards, fighting yesterday's battle. We need Britain on board. Britain has always fought tomorrow's battles. Now it is fighting yesterday's. I am worried.
What we need,
I am concerned, deeply concerned.
What we need from a British perspective is a strong United Kingdom in a strong European Union.
All right, and
I say to you, as a British Conservative, I do not just want to have Britain in the European Union, I want Britain to be one of the leading nations in the European Union.
And we'll have to leave it there. Unfortunately, the clock has caught up with us. Sajjad Karim, many thanks for joining us from London. I want to thank Matthias Feckel, Edouard Tétrault, and Antonio Di Bella. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.